great stories from those days, building that European presence. Next slide. And so I love to show pictures because it's really helpful to me to kind of visualize things. And so these are, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but it's really just to show you kind of how the family evolved over time. So first, we started with homemade founder dinners. We're really small. To 15 founders coming to the house every week, because we had a house as an office, obviously. The family, we had a home, we had family dinners. So we had weekly dinners that we would cook ourselves. And then, fast forward, next slide, 5 years later, where we had 200 plus people banquets with founders flying in from all different European cities to join this moments, and we just had to craft totally different experiences for that scale. Next slide. Then we had, we started with small workshops in French, and these again were like 2-hour long sessions in French about startups. And next slide, fast forward 5 years later, then we had 6 million views on YouTube, 40,000 events, as I mentioned, per year. But it just grew really quickly. Next slide. Then we had, in the early days, it's funny because we had a portfolio of about 30 founders, and whenever a founder would raise money, and usually it was a couple €100,000, we would rent a castle and go celebrate because it was such a huge deal. And now, as you know, we have founders raising multiple million pre-seed rounds, and no one bats an eye at it. And you can go to the next slide. And then we had 5 years later, we had summer camps with 150 founders, again flying in from all over Europe, and we did them once a year, and it was a totally new experience. Next slide. So basically what we did, I'm talking about this use case because what we did, was international on two angles. First, it was international because we were importing a concept that was built in the US, which is, Y Combinator, or an accelerator model. We were kind of importing that into Europe. And the first question was, how do we adapt this, very American concept to the French culture? And can it fit? We have on the one side, like, seemingly opposing forces. So you have the American dream versus the French elitism. You have ecosystem kind of point of view versus the French kind of centralism, where the government plays a really active role in all parts of the society and the economy. You have the US mentoring, where founders are really respected and treated as as they know what they're doing, versus the kind of European paternalism, and even the school system has people thinking in very logical terms, and just trying to fit into the mold versus trying to truly innovate. You have the and again, a lot of this is kind of cliche, not necessarily 100% true, but you have a very transactional approach to doing business in the US, where you have the better product, you're probably going to get the deal, versus in France or in Europe in general, where relationships play a very important role into getting deals done, and you build those relationships over time. Similarly, the new ideas, the new world versus heritage, and also very like open versus secret type of things. Next slide. And so the way we adapted was, we decided to build some things that take some concepts or really adapt them to the French and European ecosystem. First, not a co-working space, but a house for meetings. No demo days, but really private meetings and weekly dinners because if you have a demo day in an ecosystem that's nascent, what will happen is that there's no leverage for founders in front of investors. So investors will attend your demo day, but ultimately they will do no investments, right? No investments will happen. But if you keep your portfolio secret and you only introduce them in private meetings and dinners, then investors will fight to get access to that deal flow. No mentoring, so to avoid that paternalistic kind of mindset, but technical sessions and founders learning from each other. We created open source legal tools. And anyway, like in general, our mission really became to fight the toxicity of the ecosystem, paternalism, elitism, cynicism, and really empower ambitious founders. Next slide. So our core guiding values were the pay forward mindset, radical kindness, so in other words, tough love, and dare, care, share, and partying is a serious matter. And the next slide, you can see how kind of we adapted them to the operational aspects of the business, or the actual value proposition of business. So the pay forward became, we would say to founders, we'll take your equity, but actually you have 1 year to change your mind. If ever, there's no risk for you, because if you're not happy with the work, you can just take your shares back. We were, radical kindness was really saying tough things to the French government, when everybody was like, oh, French tech, we're amazing, this is great, we love each other. That's, we were like, no, this is not really moving the needle forward. This is not really helping founders, and just saying those tough things, Dare Care shares, really building close for personal friendships with founders. And similarly, partying is a serious matter, which most people, retain the word partying, but actually focuses on the word serious. Just really, and this is something I always go back to, is that people who develop friendships and connections, they are more willing to do irrational things for each other. And that's why, for us, that was a huge part of our work. Next slide. So the second case study is about growing onDeck in Europe. And you can go on our website for those who don't know. I saw that we have some onDeck fans in the chat. But basically what we build, is communities and education programs where people can accelerate their ideas, their careers, and really surrounded by world-class group of people. So if you're a founder trying to get your company to the next level, we have many founders programs, some more general, some more sector focused. If you're a professional, trying to get to the next level in your career, we have design programs, we have chief of staff, et cetera, et cetera. You can find out more on our website. Next slide, please. But, as it concerns international, the question here is, how do we prioritize which markets to launch? And that was a question that I was faced really early on when, onDeck was, actually the origin of onDeck was in-person fellowship happening in San Francisco. Actually started with dinners and then a fellowship, but in person in San Francisco, and then COVID happened. And we had to move everything to online. And that was a time, if you remember, in the early parts of the presentation, where I joined the community as a fellow. And then they offered me the position of launching onDeck in Europe, in typical startup style. Between the time that I accepted the job offer and the time that I actually started, the company had totally changed. And we had gone from 1 to 3 different programs, from like 5 people in the team to like 15 already. But that was nothing compared to the growth we've experienced in the past year. But anyway, at the time, I said, okay, so first, how do we prioritize which markets to focus on? That's the first question. And you should, if you're working on international for a community, you should think about, what is your framework, or what are the criteria that you use? In our case, it was obviously demand, which are the markets where we are seeing already a lot of applications happen organically. The second is ecosystem size, which for us is really important. And for us, a proxy for market size or ecosystem size is the venture capital investment in a country or in an ecosystem in any given year. Then obviously for us, time zones are super important, because we made the decision very early on that we didn't want to have local communities, in the sense that we didn't want to have like an onDeck India that was completely separate from the entire community. There's so much more value in connecting people across the globe and building a truly global community. So we decided really early on to make that. So time zones are really important, because the more, the further we go in terms of time zones, the more we have to adapt. So these are, obviously not deal breakers. These are more, how do we prioritize the markets that have the most potential and are the easiest for us to launch? And then obviously monetization, purchasing power is a reality that it's not the same across the world. But again, we use all of these more as data points to inform our strategies and make it successful. Next slide. Then our first international market was Europe. And the way we decided to launch it was first to focus. We already had 3 programs, but we decided, okay, let's focus on our flagship product, which is the Founder Fellowship. Why? Because it's a simple call to action. It's easy to to get what we are versus introducing all these other fellowships. It's a simple call to action. Just refer founders, and then we can use those learnings for other programs in other markets. So that was the initial idea. Next slide. And then what I actually ended up doing, like what does that translate into action? We went from 30 to 250 European fellows in the first 90 days. I was moderating weekly European socials and talks with fellows, hosting weekly Q&A for European candidates, and speaking to literally hundreds of people between founders, investors, and really establishing the onDeck brand in the European landscape. Next slide. So behind the scenes, I also became close friends with many European founders. I ended up investing in 2 ODF companies from the Founder Fellowship. I had regular check-ins with members of the community who helped shape onDeck Europe. So next slide. But that raises the question, what does it mean to scale onDeck, a mostly virtual product internationally? Next, please. Yeah. So that's something that touches upon, the international for any type of company is actually that you'll be a multifunctional role working with different aspects of the business and working with different aspects of the company. So first goal was making onDeck a truly global community. And what does that mean? It means that, it's a community, so it's all about the people. And to successfully launch a new market, it means to reach critical mass, so getting a critical amount of people in each of those new markets. Today, up to 60% of our fellows in any given program are outside of the US, and our community is spread across 800 plus cities in 93 countries. So our goal is to increase density within those hubs. Next slide, please. So the next one is making onDeck a truly global experience. Making it, think McDonald's, like wherever you go in the world, they might throw a Mac baguette or a Mac paneer in there, but it's more or less a homogeneous experience and you really know what to expect. So we wanted that experience. We didn't want to be like the onDeck in any given geography is a totally different thing than it is elsewhere, or there's like variations in terms of quality or whatever. So we really wanted to have like this really consistent experience. And so, the challenge was, how do we deliver a great experience that is both local and global? And the answer, short answer is a lot of in-person events, IRL, partnerships, market-specific resources. Next, please. Next slide. Then, making onDeck a truly global business, it's a reality that our business model doesn't really work similarly in different markets because of different, income levels, different purchasing powers. Our programs are paid programs. So in that case, it's not about not launching those markets because we really want to, be able to support talent all over the world. But it's more about how do we make those markets viable for us? And we do that through, partnerships and access funds. So this is something really key in terms of growing internationally is, how do we adapt our strategy to make sure that each market is viable for us? Next. Making onDeck a truly global brand. Once you have the community, once you have the product market fit, we can really double down on spreading the word and highlighting our local fellows through case studies, interviews, and the biggest focus here is really educating the market on who we are. Next. So for that, we created the role of the country manager, and you can really like skip through these the bullet points here, Jamie. So really, we get fellows to apply. The country manager for us means a very specific thing, which is they act as a kind of top of funnel type of role where they get fellows to apply, they get partners excited to sponsor. There's a lot of bullet points on this one, so you can keep going. They get people teams excited to send their talent to our programs and then hand off to another function. They get speakers excited to contribute and then hand off to programs teams and then et cetera, et cetera. So as you got it, like they get different personas within each ecosystem excited to contribute and then hand it off to the different functions within the company. Next. And this is where we get maybe to the most interesting part for people here. It's, more like the lessons learned. And so to me, the biggest learning I think was in terms of growing onDeck internationally was do things that don't scale again. So it is fairly common knowledge in the startup world that you have to do things that don't scale to start your company. But not a lot of people talk about how when you launch a new market where you don't have product market fit yet in that specific market, you actually have to do a lot of things that don't scale again. And it's really a funny situation to be in because you almost, when you look at your, home market colleagues or maybe focus on the US, if that is your home market, you almost feel like you're working at different companies, while you're working on really building the foundations and the functions from scratch, they're actually already thinking about optimizing and scaling and getting to the next level. So I thought that was like one of the biggest learnings of this. Next. When you launch a new market, and this might not be so surprising, but 80% of the work is quote unquote invisible work. So it's really less about getting PR and more about building that influence and educating the market on your value proposition. As I said, I spent months speaking to hundreds of people and getting the right people to know who you are. Whoever was asked in Europe, like, what is onDeck, had an answer for it, especially the key people in the ecosystem, and really equipping them to becoming ambassadors. And so by the time you do get the PR and the press and the people talking about you, you can actually have the reputation to back it up. It doesn't fall into a void. It actually falls into people who will talk great things about you. Next, in a strong community, members are willing to do really rational things for each other and for you. So your job is to build high trust among those members. And for me, building onDeck in Europe and the first international market, it was really key. The local first early members of the community, building trust among them. We organized a lot of small events, and I actually really, as I mentioned, became really close with that community, and they really supported me. We would not have had the success we had in Europe without them. Next. That leads well to the next point. It's creating ownership. So referrals are the biggest driver of growth for onDeck. And similarly in other communities, to go beyond onDeck, influential Clubhouse early members are still active because we helped shape the app. Some of the things that I was doing to onboard people that I invited to Clubhouse are now being used, have now been productized and are integrated into the product. And also, being the face of the app, and that was a brilliant move on their part, for example. Also, in my experience working with companies, I saw this clothing brand who had 80% conversion from waitlist to paid when they switched to co-creating their collection with customers. So those are just a few examples of, how creating ownership is really key to, especially when you're building, international markets. Different markets will demand different things from your company and your community. Some markets will be very comparable to your home market. Others will be drastically different. The key to really adapt without changing the nature of your brand and your values. So then next, don't get hung up on org structures. Focus on the problem you're trying to solve versus optimizing for your existing org. I've seen this from many professionals working in international development, is that we always think like, should we have a matrix type of organization? Who should report to who? Like, those are not real problems. You should just solve for whatever helps you in the short term. I find that usually you start by solving for the next 3 months, and that really gives you an idea of what will help you for the next 6 months, and then maybe after that you can build for the next year. But just don't get married to any type of specific org structure, because your company will essentially probably become a totally different organization every 12 months. Most setups actually do work. They're just trade-offs, and they're usually about either like prioritizing speed versus coordination. Next. The most important decision you make is people, obviously, who you hire to lead each market. And this can literally make or break your launch. Before you have an existing brand or an established brand, people follow people, right? And so when I launched onDeck in Europe, people didn't know what onDeck was. They knew who I was, and they follow me, and they trusted me, and they attended my events until it became more about onDeck, and it became this larger thing. And also, people who also are working on international, sometimes they're thinking, I should hire this person who's going to scale my company until X size, but actually what got that person is not necessarily the same. So hire for the next 18 months or so. I think we have a couple more slides, and I realize we're out of time, but one of the last things I want to say is, execute impatiently, but be patient with results. So international markets usually take time to see tangible results, but then they arrive all at once. So really, overinvest rather than underinvest, but be really patient with results. And I think that's it for me. I think we're at time. I don't know if we have time for questions, but if you wanted to get in touch, I'm gonna just drop my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, Erika. Hope my slide maneuvering didn't interrupt your flow. Don't think it did. Sounded awesome.
You're great. And right at the end, you're like started speeding up, and I was like, yes, great, because we're out of time.
Yeah, we are at time. I'm sure there are tons of questions, but thanks for sharing your email there and stuff. Yeah, really appreciate that, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of CMX Summit, and that you do too, Erika. Thanks very much again.
Thank you. Hope that was helpful. I try to cram a lot of content in there, but yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions over email. And thank you, David, for the invitation. Thanks everybody for joining today. Talk soon.
Great. Thank you, Erika.